This is an unusual building for us, a little building on the railway tracks in Melbourne. You know, Southern Cross Railway Station, which is the sort of Grimshaw roof. I'm not sure how many billion they spend on it, but despite how much money they spend on it, they couldn't get these people to organise themselves to get into that development. So at the end they just gave up and said, look, you guys, you're going to be another project by someone else down the track, and that someone else was us. They're basically all the people that work in and around the railway, so you know, train cleaning, maintenance, the signalmen, the Yardmasters, all within this one building in this sort of idea of shared facilities, and located in this sort of clearing of the tracks, where the tracks were just kind of moving apart. And because of the sort of stuff we had to put in and the sort of limited footprint, I mean, it did take on quite an elegant look. The building itself, just a very simple box. And in a way, the planning on the inside, this was a sort of negotiation that went on for probably 2 years.
We had to deal with several unions.
Multiple unions, multiple stakeholders, and trying to organise the planning. And in a way, you sort of, I mean, we weren't that fussy in the end because it was sort of too difficult. There was no sense that it could be open plan. It always had to be cellular. And it really didn't matter because it was more about this building being there for the long term, and these walls.
Those things can change in the future anyway.
These things
doesn't
will
really
change.
matter.
So the planning is pretty basic. But what we wanted to do, like this building, it's quite an expensive building, but you know it would have been expensive if we had to build it out of a tin shed. In fact, when they came to us, I think they were thinking of a sort of shed-like building because the complexity of building on the rail yards is quite immense. Trying to get your materials across the tracks and all the OH&S sort of difficulties. But the way we thought of it was that we wanted to try and provide as much kind of architectural value as possible for, off-site. So there was sort of little work on-site, but we could provide a lot off-site because we thought we could build a, I don't know, $5 million shed.
Or a $5.5 million beautiful tissue box.
Yeah. And so we started working with this idea of sort of relief, a polished relief pattern. And we had this concept, I suppose, of a sort of, building of 100 beautiful windows, so we could just sort of subtract bits of the pattern because, you know, sometimes when you're working, you think that the hardest thing for an architect to do is put a window in a wall, which, well, that's what I think, anyway. And so what we did is we divided it into sort of a series of panels which could be manufactured off-site. Those panels were made up of a internal structural face, which gave the building this incredible thermal mass, and then an outside biscuit face, and that biscuit face had a relief on it which was polished, and that could be erected very quickly on site. And the other thing about it was even though to us it was very much a public building, so it had to have this sense of important public building, even though it's a building that no one could ever access. So for us it had no real kind of front or back, had no real way in, no obvious way in. And it also, for us to have a sort of sense of mystery, but a sense of quality was important. The whole process we found, you know, it's quite aesthetic. Well, I found it quite aesthetic. Even these aren't our drawings, these are the precast panel drawings, the shop drawings. But they're all quite beautiful drawings. You know, there's hundreds of them. And then even the work on the factory, the windows or the moulds they had to make for the windows, the cutouts for the relief pattern, which is all that sort of one kite-like shape just rearranged around. And then even these guys would sort of draw the chalk on the ground, which basically sets up the reinforcement. So they sort of lay the reinforcement over the pattern and they cut it to the particular reinforcement for the particular panel. We totally underestimated the complexity of this, even though we worked closely with the panel guys all the way through from design, where all of us, even they, underestimated the complexity because...
They kept telling us it was hard. It wasn't until we actually went there that we realised how hard it was.
Yeah, it was just because we put so many processes into one panel, like it's hard enough to do a polished panel, but then you do a polished relief, or then you do a double panel system. But that's the thermal insulation, which is just a little plastic lug that spans between it. That panel is there. It's got the front face poured, but the structural face is yet to be poured. And then they pour the front face at the top, then they have to put plywood in the windows, they pour another face over plastic, which is that one, then they polish it, and then they remove that, which the workers on the site were devastated when that was removed. They thought that was a crime. And that's some of the panels on site. And even the erection was quite theatrical.
A construction can only occur between 12 and 4 in the morning.
The building had to be totally sealed because of the diesel fumes, so there's no open windows, it's all air conditioned, but it's all air conditioned through chill beams, and the internal mass, because it's got that insulation between it, is incredibly sort of stable in terms of its temperature. Behaves all different lights. It's not quite finished, so some of the windows are just going in now. This sort of totally frameless detail around the windows.